Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to today's Housing and Communities Committee meeting. As we reach the end of January, I hope that it's not too late to wish everyone a happy new year and the best wishes for 2019. To today's meeting, I'd like to welcome the tenant representatives, Patricia Bremner and Lynn Palmer. You're very welcome to today's meeting. And we look forward to any contributions that you may have to the reports in front of us today. Thank you for that. We have apologies from Councillor Caroline Shires, who's being substituted by Councillor Anne Jarvis. Are there any other apologies or substitutions? No. Okay, that's great. Item 3 on our agenda is the Housing and Communities Committee minutes of the Housing and Communities Committee meeting of 31st of October for approval and signature. Can we agree to approve the minute and for me to sign it? Yep. Thank you. All right. My enthusiasm to get started, we've omitted the declarations of interest. So are there any declarations of interest from elected members with regard to any items on the agenda? No? Okay, thank you for that. We had previously been advised by Police Scotland that they might have had difficulty in attending the committee meeting due to the earlier start of 9:30, and we've since received apologies from Chief Superintendent Andrew Todd. Given that we have a relatively short agenda today, I propose that we don't vary the order of business as we've done previously, but that we just proceed with the agenda in front of us. Is everybody happy with that? Good. In which case, can I ask the Vice Convener to take paper 4? Thank you.
Thank you, Convener, and good morning, Committee. This paper is the regular update for the Committee covering the period October 2018 to January of this year. As you will see, there have been a number of developments over the period. All 7 local action partnerships continue to bring forward a number of initiatives and projects, such as youth provision and representation, food poverty and isolation, transport, and devolving resources to allow for more localised issues to be addressed. Ward panels are or have been established to review applications submitted to the Community Investment Fund, and the latest figures show 31 applications amounting to £488,000. An improvement plan for local action partnerships has been approved with key actions to be delivered in the first quarter of this year, and proposals to build on the success of the Fair Futures work are to be brought forward, which will include a revised action plan. We have Fiona Robertson with us this morning, and she's prepared to take any questions. So are there any questions from members? Councillor McEwan.
Thank you, Vice Convener. Regarding the Community Investment Fund, I've got a bullet points, a few questions here, but they're probably just straightforward, simple yes/no type answers. If the award doesn't spend all its money, is that money carried forward? If the ward committee doesn't approve an application or support it, does the applicant have the right to appeal it to SPNR? Is there a time frame in which the money needs to be spent by the applicant? Do they need to show that it actually met the goal that they suggested it would? It was spent in that way and had that outcome. And will we get a report back on this of the outcomes of the spend through the SIF funding mechanism?
My understanding is if the money's not spent, it is rolled over. But I'll ask Fiona Robertson if she might answer the other questions for us.
Thank you, Councillor McEwan, for the questions. Is this on? Can you hear me okay? I'll take your points in order. On your first question, can funds which aren't allocated through the Community Investment Fund in year 1 be carried forward to year 2? The answer is yes to that. In terms of right of appeal to SPNR if an application is declined at local level, we haven't built in an appeal process, I suppose because we are hopeful that if an application is not successful, the feedback that the community officers in the council will give to that organisation and the support and advice that they will give to help them think about how they might reapply, if that's appropriate, that would be effective in most cases. The criteria, as you'll know, Councillor McEwen, they're quite broad because we wanted to encourage the widest possible range of applications and projects to come forward, but they are also very clear about what is and what isn't eligible. So, for example, we won't fund costs for political activities, we won't fund core costs like salary costs. Projects have got to be either deliverable within a defined period of time or capable of being self-funding if the community organisation wants them to continue after CIF funding has finished. On your question about the deadline for when funding has to be spent, year one funding has to be spent, the project delivered by the end of September this year. And we will ask all successful applicants just to complete a very brief post-project update for us in terms of what's been delivered and has the project met the original goals that the applicant hoped to achieve. And your final point just, I think, was in terms of reporting back to SPNR and what's been delivered overall. Yes, we will be doing that. So we will have a report go to SPNR in April this year with learning from year one and some recommendations about what might need to change to make the CIF work as well as possible in year two. And there will be follow-up reports to SPNR regularly on what has collectively been delivered across Perth and Kinross as a whole.
One of your answers has stimulated another question for me. Is you said that monies could roll over from year one to year two. And that's a very definite answer rather than just saying monies can roll over. So when we get to year two, is there a deadline by which the year two monies need spent by, i.e. they can't roll over further?
I think we haven't got to that stage yet, Councillor McEwen, but the Community Investment Fund is a 2-year fund, so that's the commitment that the Council has made at the moment. I'm sure that through our normal NGO flexibility processes, there may be some potential for projects that haven't been completely delivered by end of March 2020, which would be the end of year two, to carry forward, but there will need to be a cut-off date, which is clear, given that, as I say, it's only a 2-year fund.
Any further questions? Councillor Jarvis.
Yes, I'd say I note that there's to be a review, which is good, but I'm beginning to get a little bit of feedback from some groups which suggest that the minimum amount is too high and they only need maybe a couple of £100. I mean, is that something that's going to be looked at? And would it be possible that they could put in an application now, even though it's out with the criteria?
Thank you for the question, Councillor Jarvis. We did think about what the minimum funding amount should be when we first set up the Community Investment Fund, and the reason why it's set at £3,000 is because there are a number of other funds that community organisations can apply to for less than that amount, including community participatory budgeting schemes, common good, where that's applicable, and some other funds as well. So that was the reason we didn't want to confuse the funding landscape, as it were.
Councillor Waters.
Thank you, Vice Convener. If an applicant is successful in applying for some funds and they're unable to fulfil the project, example, maybe not be able to get match funding that's required for them to commence with the project, what mechanisms are in place, or what advice will the council be giving to potentially get that money back, or how to deal with that type of situation?
Thanks for the question, Councillor Waters. I think there are maybe two separate things. I mean, if for whatever reason, once a grant has been awarded, it's not possible to deliver that project because things change, that happens. That would be a case-by-case basis, and council officers would work with the community organisation through the local action partnership to see if the project can be delivered in a different way, if it needs to be deferred, or if for whatever reason it can't proceed. If it can't proceed, or if there are any other concerns that, as grant monitoring officers, we in the council have about how the monies are being used, then we have standard clawback processes as part of our general conditions of grant, which the applicant will have signed up to when they've agreed to take the grant.
Do we have any further questions? Can we agree to move the paper? Agreed? Thank you. Thank you, convener.
Item 5 is the Housing Revenue Account HRA Strategic Financial Plan, incorporating the 5-year capital investment programme and rent strategy to 2023-24, the reserve strategy and other charges for the forthcoming year. I propose that we will take the paper in the following order. We've got a video presentation. Claire Mailer, the Head of Housing, will then introduce the report and we'll open for questions at that stage. I then intend to formally, or to move the paper, seconded by the Vice Convener, and will then open for comments or any other amendment. So just to clarify how we'll be proceeding this morning. As I say, they say a picture is worth 1,000 words, and we do have a video which covers the rent restructuring and remodelling exercise undertaken by this council, which has recently received recognition by our Fairness Commissioners and nationally at one of the Scottish Government Housing Beyond 2021 events, and which serves to highlight our partnership approach to genuine engagement with tenants on rents. And the technology appears to be working without hitch, so here's the video.
This project provided opportunities for engagement and partnership working, enabling tenants to drive and influence the rent restructure process. The project reflects the ethos of fairer futures for all.
So why did we start doing the rent restructure? Well, the model that we currently use to calculate all our rents was actually developed, believe it or not, in 1974, and it remained unchanged since then. It was really difficult to understand and complex to explain. So we took a decision that, it was an appropriate time to look at changing the way we calculate and charge rents.
Tenants were key to this project being a success. We needed to get them involved from the very beginning because this impacts on 7,500 tenants, and we're talking about £26 million worth of income, so it needed to be correct, and we needed to have the people that were being impacted by that involved from the very beginning.
The whole reason why it's a success is that tenants were involved right from the start. When requests were given out or sent out to ask them to take part in it, to choose the technical advisor, right through to sitting at the table with the senior management, we got a say at the table and what we thought would be the best way forward and would be a fair way forward. That's what made it a huge success.
The rent model that was delivered allowed us to continue to meet our commitments to all our tenants, and also importantly as well, affordability, because not only as a result of the partnership did we develop a rent model, but we also introduced a model that could assess how affordable rents were for people in Perth and Kinross, and I think that's particularly important in the environment we're in just now.
With the tenants being involved from the very beginning, we built that trust and openness and honesty with them, and that's paid dividends with the new groups that we've got with the tenants going forward, which is scrutinising the Housing Revenue Account.
Proudest moment, yeah, obviously the model, that's what we set out to achieve, but to actually hear that your partnership approach has been recognised as sector leading by a tenant advisor, technical advisor, who's been involved in 15 similar projects throughout Scotland. So really, at the end of it, to sort of truly see that you have achieved an effective partnership was just amazing, and get that recognition for everyone involved.
Okay, thank you for that. I'll now ask Claire to introduce the report. You make these comments about the technology at your peril, don't you?
Not doing too well with the technology today. I've normally got quite a loud voice as well. Is that better? We delivered a similar presentation to our tenants at their winter conference in October. Before I start, I think it's important to advise committee that during this year we've undertaken a benchmarking exercise to compare our approach to managing the Housing Revenue Account business plan with other local authorities in Scotland. The exercise has confirmed that the Housing Revenue Account is well run and that the 30-year business plan is in good financial health. So that exercise has given our senior management team and ourselves as a housing management team the necessary reassurance. The excellent tenant satisfaction results this year show that our tenants are highly satisfied with the service provided to them. We continually strive to balance quality of service delivery with performance and cost by delivering an efficient and value for money service wherever we possibly can. In managing the Housing Revenue Account, we're required to meet Scottish Government guidance. This aims to ensure that tenants receive the maximum benefit from their rents. It helps to ensure consistency across Scotland in the way that all housing revenue accounts operate. It aims to promote the efficient use of resources and helps to ensure transparency in the operation of the Housing Revenue Account. It allows tenants to better understand how the housing service is delivering benefits and at what cost, in line with the Scottish Social Housing Charter. So, how much money do we have? This slide demonstrates the overall budgets for housing, both the housing revenue and the general fund, and also funding for revenue and capital. The capital budget shown is for 2018-19 only. The total 5-year capital budget is 68 million, with 36.3 million of this being set aside for increasing our council stock through the new builds and the buybacks. And I just must point out the report that we're considering today obviously considers the housing revenue account. We're required to share information with our tenants on how the rent is used, and this slide, I think you would agree, gives a good visual overview of the breakdown of our housing revenue expenditure and how much of every pound of tenants' rent is spent on each area of the service. Repairs and maintenance at 30p in every pound covers emergency repairs, day-to-day repairs, voids, adaptations and capital investment. 28p for neighbourhood services, you'll be aware, covers our locality housing teams, but also sheltered housing, allocations, housing options, and some aspects of our housing support service. The financing costs at 25p are our loan charges for past and future borrowing of the capital programme, and the CFCR, capital funded from current revenue, is a budget within our revenue account which is set aside to cover any overspends. And any surplus from that is then used to fund capital borrowing, and that amounts to 10p. And the support services at 7p in every pound is our corporate recharge for services that the housing service receive from our corporate colleagues. So that could cover legal services, human resources, finance, business improvement, and so on. The Scottish Social Housing Charter sets the standards and outcomes that all social landlords must aim to achieve when performing their housing activities. Outcomes 14 and 15 on the slide are the outcomes directly linked to the rent setting process and the financial aspect and delivery of the housing revenue account that we're considering today. These outcomes reflect landlords' legal duty to consult tenants about affordability and inform them on how the rent is spent. We must also decide with our tenants whether we publish information on expenditure and the format and the level of detail to provide. So obviously the information I showed you on the previous slide. And it's clear that discussions must take place about rent levels, and any decisions about rent increases must reflect our tenants' views. So that's absolutely key for us as a consideration going forward. The Scottish Housing Regulator undertook a thematic study a couple of years ago, and as a result of the study, we identified just 3 areas of improvement to our own approach. Those are detailed on the slide. We wanted to look more about how we determine affordability, and you'll see that Michelle mentioned that in the video clip that we saw. We need to talk not just to current tenants, but also to prospective tenants. So through the consultation process, any people on our waiting list that have been offered accommodation have also been consulted through this process over the last few months. And also giving tenants genuine options for proposed rent increases. So in the past, we would go through an exercise and we would say this is what the outcome of the exercise is, the proposed rent is, whatever percent it was. Over the last 2 years, we've gone out and we've given tenants 3 genuine options to vote on. So those have been 3 improvements over the last couple of years that we've introduced. This is our 5th year of our approach to tenant consultation. The process starts very early in the year, as detailed on the slide, and I think as a management team we're also now planning next year's process going into April. We send out a questionnaire to all 7,500 tenants in April, asking them about their priorities for the delivery of the housing service. In June, we held a summer conference and again asked tenants for more detailed information from their initial feedback. We held a series of tenants events across the localities over the summer, and from September onwards, we used that feedback to inform our decision-making process. In October, we held a further event, presented the tenant with the 3 options to consider, and up until December, our tenants have been voting on the options that they were presented with. This bar graph gives us a quick overview of some of the feedback that tenants gave us in response to the initial questionnaire. And as I say, these have been used to inform the rent setting proposals. Maintaining and improving their home at 67.2% was, and I have to say continues to be, the highest priority, with environmental improvements, continuing to improve the way we deliver our repair service, and increasing our housing stock, also featuring highly. Repairs and condition of home, because that touches on every single tenant, always features very highly in terms of their priorities. In relation to the locality teams, a key priority this year was, however, to improve the way that we deal with complaints and tackling antisocial within the neighbourhood. So we've taken that into account as we go forward. Just got a couple more slides. The feedback from tenants was considered alongside the priorities and pressures that we identified as a service, and the 3 rent increases, with increasing levels of service for each, were then identified. We ran the options through the Housing Revenue Account business plan to sense check against affordability and delivery. We considered the impact of the pressures and the savings against the plan to assess the short and the longer term impacts and ensure the ongoing financial health of the service. So it isn't just about what happens next year. Obviously any impacts and rent increases affect the longer term business plan. And we then submitted these proposals to our senior management team for consideration. The rent increase options that the tenants have been voting on are detailed on the slide. We received 1,060, and that represents 14% return of responses from our tenants. That was a significant increase from last year. In fact, it was a 298% increase last year. One of the questions we were asked at this committee last year was about the level of consultation, and we gave committee a commitment at that time to make improvements. We set ourselves a target of 1,000, and I'm pleased to say that we exceeded that. And you can see the feedback from the options there. 58% of our tenants opted and voted for option 1, a 1.5% rent increase. This is the information on the slide, which I appreciate is quite detailed, but it is certainly within your report, that all tenants received at and following the October conference. We explained to tenants at the time that irrespective of the rent increase, the investment in our capital programme would not change and certainly would not reduce. And the next slide provides the details on each of the rent options, highlighting which proposals are fixed across each option. So as you can see along the top box, irrespective of the option agreed, it's proposed that we invest in each of these areas detailed to meet our tenant and service priorities. And we can talk about that in a wee bit more detail later on. Each option then detailed increasing levels of investment, particularly in voids, buybacks and planned maintenance and environmental improvements. What I would stress is that we obviously are investing in each of these areas. In any case, the higher level rent options just gave us an opportunity to put a higher level of investment in. Okay, so finally, I think it's important, going back to Michelle's points there in terms of affordability. In addition to understanding the impact on investment levels, it's really important that we understand the impact of rent increases on affordability for our tenants. A couple of years ago, as Michelle explained, we developed an affordability modelling tool. So, as we do each year, we've run our proposed options through this, and as you can see, each of the options remain well below the national average. And as you'll see within section 2.11 within the report, the affordability assessment has indicated that 83% of residents could afford our rents based on their income alone. So that's been a really good sense check for us. And our rents continue to remain one of the lowest in Scotland. We sit at about 8th lowest at the moment, and we're projecting that with this increase, we'll sit round about the same 7th or 8th lowest going forward. So just to recap, we're required to consult with our tenants about the level of rents we set. We've had a good response this year, and all current and prospective tenants have had an opportunity to vote. We provided an overview of proposals at each of the BRG sessions. The report that we're presenting to you today recommends that committee supports the tenants' preferred option of a 1.5% increase. We will be able to fully deliver on our tenants' priorities and indeed meet our identified service pressures. And then following committee today, we'll obviously write to all of our tenants, notifying them of the outcome and details of the rent increase and how this affects them individually.
Thank you very much for that, Claire. Do we have any questions on the report or the presentation? Councillor McCall.
Thank you, Convener. First of all, I'd like to start by saying congratulations on the increase in tenant participation. I'm really pleased that questions raised from previous committee meetings are taken forward and to have such a positive outcome. My question really is about the strategy or the proposal to make permanent an officer for older people. And while I think this is absolutely welcome and I would completely support it, I just wondered if there are other vulnerable groups, particularly those with particular needs, particularly those who are disabled, and specifically those with learning disabilities who has been recognised in a separate committee that they are particularly vulnerable and very often at risk. So I'm just wondering what proposals may be in place to consider housing officers or particular focus on potential tenants with those requirements.
Obviously, you'll see with the next paper that we're looking to put specific supports in for other tenants with complex and multiple needs. But with regard specifically to disability, I'm not aware of any proposals in this budget covering that, but I don't know whether you can comment further on that, Claire.
No, there aren't any specific proposals, certainly within the current budget proposals going forward, but we already undertake a significant amount of work in terms of providing housing and working with our health and social care colleagues to provide housing support and care where required to all the vulnerable groups. And we're currently actually have been pulling together our housing contribution statement, which will be going to the forthcoming IJB, which gives a detailed overview of all of the work that we are undertaking. So we work very, very closely through our housing allocations process. For any vulnerable groups that require housing, we'll make sure that we can identify housing, suitable housing, and work closely with our health and social care colleagues to ensure that the necessary care and support is also offered. Through a new build programme over the course of the last year or so we've built a number of specially designed properties for wheelchair users, certainly Birch Avenue in Scone, that included 4 fully adapted wheelchair access ground floor properties, specifically for tenants who required that type of accommodation. And we're undertaking some modelling work with our health and social care colleagues at the moment to determine current short-term and longer-term needs of all of the different groups with special housing requirements.
Thank you, Claire, for that response. I appreciate it. I think in the situation, particularly for adults with learning disabilities who may be seeking housing, the the housing application process is, as far as I can understand it, the standard one that most people would apply for. However, many adults with learning disabilities are socially isolated, and in fact perhaps some consideration may need to be made to their social inclusion, particularly to be near family and friends and environments or areas where they either grow up or be familiar. So perhaps some consideration could be made in the future to look at the housing application process and the allocation of points. I suppose it's a points-based system to take those sorts of things into account.
We will be reviewing our housing allocations policy, which I think is due to come to the March committee, so we can take your comments on board, and very happy to have a discussion with regard to the capital investment priorities, because some of the delivery of some of those projects is particularly difficult because of the level of investment involved, and I think we're going to have to look quite imaginatively and collaboratively as to how we deliver those sorts of projects to deliver that sort of social contact that you're seeking, Councillor McCall. So very happy to have those discussions with you. Are there any other questions? Councillor Bailey, Councillor Gray, did you want in as well?
Yeah, I'll ask a question here.
Oh, sorry, I was going to go for Councillor Bailey first. But,
on you go.
Thank you, Convener. It's a wee small parochial question, if I may. According to my recollection, I think the project to provide 5 units in Invergowrie was previously due to be starting during this calendar year that we're into now. It slipped to a TBC on page 23 of this report. Is there any specific background that can be given as to why that has changed, if indeed it has changed, if my recollection is correct? Thank you.
Yeah, I think absolutely that was kind of one of the projects that I was alluding to in my previous comments. I think there are issues with the per unit cost of that development. There were issues in the community about the loss of parking, but I think it was with regard to the feasibility of that project as a standalone project, being out with a larger development or a different type of collaboration. I don't know whether Claire can expand on that further for Councillor Bailey or Barbara.
No, I mean, absolutely what we're currently doing is considering, as Councillor Barrett indicated there, this is a very new and I suppose sort of quite an innovative, different project for us as a housing, and I suppose in partnership. I mean, this very much has been a partnership project with health and social care colleagues. Due to the high specification of the properties, the unit costs are coming in extremely high, and at the moment we're undertaking a review with health and social care colleagues to establish the best way forward. We do actually have got a workshop planned tomorrow, Thursday, with health and social care colleagues, so we'll have a better idea of the next steps over the next couple of weeks.
I think Barbara wants to add to that, Alistair, as well. But I think one of the issues there was about predicting demand for that type of specialist accommodation. And I think we were talking about a 4 or 5 bedroom unit or capacity. There was an indication from the Integrated Joint Board that there could be further demand for that. And what we didn't want to do was to go down the route of building something to cater for 4 or 5 people and then discover that you've got 2 or 3 more people to then look for specialist accommodation in addition to that. Barbara, do you want to?
All I would want to add is, sort of clearly this has been an issue in the community, and I think, sort of following on from the workshop, then, sort of the team will feed back to the 3 local elected members, sort of as well.
Thank you. Yeah, I mean, one of my concerns is to ensure that we're offering this accommodation and helping these individuals in the speediest way possible. But I appreciate the work that's going on. Thank you.
Councillor Gray.
Thank you, Convener. I really have a few questions on buyback and the numbers of houses sold over a period. Do we have any statistics on this? The numbers sold and sort of categories sold, that is flats or semi-detached, etc.
Yeah, I can certainly say that last year we purchased 41 buybacks. Many of them, June probably has got more of a detail in terms of whether or not they're flatted or house type. Many of them are 2-bedroomed or above. Buy them sort of throughout areas where we've got demand or we're struggling to meet a specific housing need within the area. And what we've also been doing very much is where we've got one remaining owner within a block of, say, 4 of council properties. So it gives us almost a win-win by purchasing the last, or the bringing property back into council ownership then gives us an opportunity to undertake some of the wider repairs. But I don't know if June wants to add more detail in terms of house type and size.
Yes, just as Claire says, we really have bought properties across the whole boundary of Perth Kinross and of a range of sizes. The driver for the buyback scheme is really the waiting list and the demand for the size in a particular location. Lately, we have focused mainly on larger family-sized housing, which then gives us the opportunity for vacancy chains and to be able to house a number of households off the waiting list. But we do have a full breakdown of all categories of housing, all sizes, all locations and everything that we can certainly pass on to you.
I'd be glad to have that. And could you include the houses which have actually been sold in that period?
We can do that. We need to get that information from legal services, but there shouldn't be any in recent years because
yeah, quite. Well, how recent? When did buyback start? When did the sale of them stop? Sorry. 16, yeah. Right, okay.
And the buyback scheme started in 2012-13.
Right. Okay. Right, thank you. It's helpful.
I think we've also been using or looking to use buyback strategically where it would give us the majority in a tenement property, so that could unblock the log jams with tenancy management schemes and get works that have been delayed by that progressed.
Could I ask a wee question here? It might not be relevant. Is there any feedback on the circumstances which bring about the sale of or the sale again of council houses, or are they just as would happen in the normal housing market?
Anecdotally, Tom, I've had casework from tenants in my patch who've been looking to move into sheltered accommodation and have therefore wanted to sell their council house back to the council, or move into residential accommodation. I don't know if there's a wider analysis available.
No, but again, we could get that. I mean, very much is about people sort of moving on to alternative, more suitable accommodation to meet their needs. So it's just, I'm not aware of it being any different from any other area. But again, if our estates team might have some information, so we can look into that.
And it's clearly different from the mortgage to rent scheme. So. Barbara?
Thank you for that. A couple of things, sort of the buybacks are always reported on an annual basis through property subcommittee, so that the report that contains all of the transactions that the estates team are involved in reports that, sort of with all the, sort of the areas that they are in, clearly not in the detail in terms of the size of house, but we will be able to provide that as June has said. And I think that the other thing that reflects, sort of both within the report and in Claire's presentation, that this is clearly a priority, sort of for our tenants, sort of in terms of the capital investment that we're putting in. It increases the housing stock and provides us with more options.
Are there any further questions? Tom, sorry.
I've got a few questions. I was waiting back in case other councillors were going to ask them for me. Wishful thinking. On page 18, item 2.12 mentions that 83% of our tenants can afford our rents. Can I explain that a bit further? Because obviously, if somebody can't afford our rents, what, are they living in a tent in the North Inch?
No. But I think what it does mean was that they were able to afford the rent based on their income alone, without regard to any housing benefit that they might receive. But Claire, is that it? Yeah.
Yeah, it's as stated within the report there, it's without taking into account any housing benefits. So those that obviously can't afford the rent, that's obviously when the benefit assessment then kicks in.
In Appendix 1 on page 35, there's property costs. And in the property costs, there's one item that actually results in an increase in our costs, and that's other property costs. So the thing that actually increased our costs in that area, we've actually no detail on. So what are other property costs?
Hi, Stephen. Excuse me, sorry. Other property costs, that's where we've got our adjustment to our bad and doubtful debt provision within that heading. So within the executive summaries, you see we're increasing our bad and doubtful debt provision by over £400,000, and that's where it reflects in Appendix 1.
All my other questions I could probably roll into one, and it's based around public engagement, which I know is a challenge for the council. It can be quite difficult, and the figures we've got back here on the feedback, although much improved, are still a pretty challenging figure when such a small number of our residents will engage with us about the rent that they're going to pay and how we're going to spend that money going forward. And also rolled into this paper is the estate-based initiative process, which is an absolute brilliant process that I've been on in Rattray and my own residents, but you don't see a huge amount of tenants actually engaging in this. So again, to keep on improving our service and keep on reflecting on what we've done now and going forward, what are our things going forward? Do we need to do roadshows? Do we do something more dynamic? It's how we're presenting our information to the tenants, to councillees, and it needs to be much more graphical and much more user-friendly for our tenants.
I think, firstly, it is important to recognise that we've, sort of quadrupled the level of engagement and feedback that we've had from tenants. You'll see in the proposals for next year that we're looking to expand and increase the estate-based initiative activity. And yeah, sometimes it is small numbers of tenants and residents that are involved in that. But I think the important message and the important actions are that we are engaging with tenants in response to them stating that that's a priority to make a difference on the ground and improve the local environment. And I think that when people see that their input can have a difference, then that's much more likely to encourage greater participation. Success breeds success. I don't know whether there's anything that you want to add to that. Certainly, I think we need to look beyond the kind of traditional tenants rent setting conference or tenants conference that they have at the Salutation or other venues and look to be delivering more roadshows and local events which are more open to people, as well as going to things that are happening in the community where people go anyway, rather than expecting people to come to us. And those are the things that we're looking to do in the coming year and beyond. Claire, do you want to add to that?
Yeah, I absolutely agree, and as you can see from the charter outcomes, and certainly from our point of view as a landlord, tenant consultation, tenant involvement, tenant engagement is absolutely at the heart of everything that we do. A recent tenant and resident participation strategy that was approved by committee last year made a commitment within that actually to have a much more locality focus to tenant engagement, and we've restructured our tenant participation team, so each officer now has a locality responsibility and are linking very closely with our locality housing teams. As you know, our locality housing officers attend and undertake a significant amount of tenant engagement activity, but we're certainly ensuring that they undertake even a greater level. We will be replicating the approach that we've recently taken in terms of the voting on the rent options much earlier on in the year, in terms of the information, tenant giving us information about the rent priorities, and that is a collective team effort across the full housing service, but obviously also with our tenant representatives who support us really heavily with that. We've had a number of improvements. We undertake a massive amount of social media engagement with our tenants, and fairly significant increase in terms of Facebook and Twitter over the course of the last year. We're reporting a 27% increase in terms of Facebook activity and a 17% in-year increase in terms of Twitter. We have housing revenue account monitoring group for tenants, tenant and resident participation monitoring groups. Sure Team undertake a massive amount of activity for us. They've just recently concluded some scrutiny of our tenement management scheme. We have established an e-panel, and I have to say that again gives them, I think, as you say, different opportunities to participate and engage and influence the services we deliver at a level that suits them. So some tenants are heavily involved, for example, committee representatives, members of the Sure Team. Others just like to sort of vote online and maybe would be a member of the panel. So yeah, it is a continued focus for us. I think in terms of taking forward our commitment over the course of this year, we're doing well, but absolutely there is room for improvement, and we'll continue with that commitment going forward.
We're going to have comments later.
As councillors, we create leaflets, which we take pictures of ourselves around our wards, showing the good work that we do for our communities. Is that something that the housing service need to replicate or copy to show outcomes? So it's not just the engagement itself, but as you said yourself, convener, that if our residents see the outcomes that happen from engagement and the things that we're doing, they're more likely then to engage.
Yeah, I think effective communications are something that we want to look at. You know, we've also got to ensure that any wizard wheezes that we have are endorsed by the tenants, because ultimately it's their money that we're spending. And they may have some concerns as to whether the literature is actually endorsing and highlighting the good work that they're doing, as opposed to any other purpose, Tom. So, okay, Councillor Waters.
Thank you, convener. Just in relation to the three options of the rent increases 1.5, 2.2 and 3, the improvements I think or the extra that would be delivered through 2.2 and 3 where it related to environmental improvements. Now, as far as these papers go, the environmental improvements is the locality as not the environment as in the climate, dealing with climate change. That is correct. Given that the importance of affordability for our tenants is something that we should all be proud of, and it's something that there's obviously a clear desire to keep that affordability. There's also a value element to housing with people, and we see within the survey that was done that 67.2% the residents and tenants were keen to see the energy efficiency and that improve, which gives a value and an affordability to the houses as well. Bringing that into context with the climate change issues, where we've read late last year one of the most climate change reports, damaging climate change reports we've ever read, and the importance of that we all need to do our part to deal with that. And one of the main things within housing is energy efficiency, and I understand and know we're doing a huge amount already in that area, but is there more within this year's rent increase that can be done if a 2.2 or 3% was going within that area? Or is it something that we can consider for future years, that we also take recognition of potential or how we as a council can send a message out to help deal with climate change, which does, you know, in gearing up and doing more in energy efficiency, make a bigger statement on our environmental, as in climate change, credentials and the message that we send out as a council.
I think I would go back to the comments that Claire made during her presentation, and that was that the key elements of the capital investment programme were secured regardless of what the rent option that the tenants voted for was, and that includes, I think off the top of my head, £4 million for new central heating systems, high efficiency central heating systems, and it also includes I think it might be, and I could be making this figure up off the top of my head, around about £2 million for triple glazed windows, as well as other investment in energy efficiency. We have the ongoing annual programme of the HEAP-SABs, the Home Energy Efficiency schemes, area-based initiatives, which have delivered things like the external wall insulation to the hard to treat properties. They've done things like installing renewables, as well as converting people from expensive and carbon-consuming electrical heating systems over to more efficient gas systems. So there's a lot of work ongoing already, Richard, which I think would reassure you on the point that you raised there. Claire, I don't know if there's anything you want to add to that, or June.
No, I mean, I would agree. As you're aware, we're undertaking, a significant number of measures already in terms of renewables, ensuring that we can optimise the energy efficiency of our property. We perform well against the EISH standards, and we're absolutely committed in terms of fuel poverty, but also obviously in terms of climate change. Any future improvements in that respect we will need to take into next year. So we're just about to sort of commence over the next sort of few months in terms of tenant consultation, and that will be undertaking the value for money in terms of the cost and the energy efficiency. We've got hard to heat element within the rent restructure as well, so people that are sort of off grid and their properties are not as efficient, we've got the hard to heat element there. So it's a continued focus for us as a service, and it's certainly something in terms of our engagement and discussions with tenants that we will continue to have.
My belief is that the council have recently created a new post for a climate change officer. Can we have confirmed if that is correct and they're in place, and either just now or at some future date to get a briefing on what the remit of the officer will be, and especially in relation to this committee. And it would be nice to see, and I accept fully that we are doing a huge amount for the environment stuff and the upgrades, all the upgrades we're doing. It's whether we can do. My question was really based on: is there more that we can do?
Okay, Councillor Waters, I think we might be straying towards the boundaries of the remit of this committee with the questions that you're asking. Certainly, if there is an impact and a contribution that the climate change officer can make in housing, we'd be glad to encourage that and support it. But I'll let the director respond to that, and then I think are there any other questions after that? Councillor Drysdale, and then I think we need to make some progress.
Okay, thank you for your questions, Councillor Waters. Yes, there is a climate change officer, that sits within Peter Marshall's team within the forward planning section within the housing and environment. The purpose of that post is actually, to take what the government legislation is proposing, and making sure that the council in totality is prepared for the changes that are recommended and the outcomes that are expected. That officer is part of a climate change officer group that was agreed through the former Environment Committee probably about a year and a half ago, and members of the housing team are involved in that. There is a small group, a small team within John Cruikshank's and June's team, that do a lot of work in terms of sort of making sure that our houses are as energy as efficient as possible. And linked to that, then, sort of we're involved in a fairly innovative project with another council and SSE in terms of warm homes, and that's in relation to making sure that, sort of those homes in particular areas, sort of where we have experienced the difficulties in terms of food poverty and where they can get very little access to gas, for example. So we're taking that forward there as well. And I would like, sort of, is probably, sort of in response a little bit to Councillor McEwan's question as well, that, I mean, I've been lucky enough to be the Executive Director for both Housing and Environment for almost a year now. And one of the things that if you present a challenge to them, they rise to that challenge remarkably well, sort of, and I'm inordinately proud of them, both in relation to they will be determined to increase and improve the tenant participation, sort of, and they are absolutely committed to making sure that, sort of the affordability of houses, sort of for our tenants is uppermost in their minds, and also about making sure that people can afford to heat their houses.
Councillor Drysdale.
Thank you, Convener. I just wanted to pick up on one of the answers to Councillor McEwan's questions, and also what Barbara has been saying there about the excellent work that has been done by the service in so many areas, for which we should all be very proud and very grateful. The one answer was in relation to breaking out the other property costs figure and shining a light on the hidden element in there of the increased bad and doubtful debt provision as a result, presumably, of universal credit rollout and the appalling way in which that has had to come to this area during 2018. I just want, first of all, I do know that the considerable work and the considerable pressure that council officers and staff are face in trying to deal with genuine areas of difficulty, and despite the low level of our rents, a figure of 400,000 is already forecast for 1920 for bad and doubtful debt. That's a significant proportion of the overall rents. Is there anything more that can be done to address this issue? Is one question, and my second question would be in future appendices and budget details, if that figure could be separated out for transparency purposes, that would be helpful.
Okay, I don't know how it's been reported in the past, Eric, and certainly this is with regard to setting the budget, and we report regularly on rent arrears and bad and doubtful debt to this committee. So I think that there is a high degree of transparency with regard to that. There's certainly no doubt that the impacts of universal credit are contributing to the need to raise that provision for bad and doubtful debt, and this committee has also discussed regularly the efforts and the initiatives that we're taking and the work that we are doing to support tenants who find themselves in arrears or faced with other debts as well. And I think that that's also recognised by our tenants in the priorities that they have set that were in the earlier presentation too. So yeah, I think that we are taking firm cognizance of the issue. If it would help to separate that in the budget heading, I don't know whether somebody else would then turn up and say, and what's that in others, and then want a breakdown of that as well. You could end up sort of going on for forever in that vein. Claire, is there anything you want to add to that, or Barbara?
Yeah, just Stephen's nodding his head, so it is possible to separate that out, and we will do that in future. I think in terms of universal credit, unfortunately, it's very difficult, sort of to know what the full impact of that is. At the moment, there's about 560 of our tenants that have gone through to full service, sort of, and we are noticing a difference, sort of, but in the main, sort of many of those tenants were already in arrears anyway, sort of, so it is then difficult to understand what that full impact is. And equally, we don't really understand what the sort of the most recent announcement in terms of changes to universal credit will actually mean to our tenants. So that the amount that we're putting in is, sort of really to be safe, and it is, sort of a very prudent approach, which I think, sort of the committee will understand is the best way to deal with this.
Councillor Coates, and then I'm going to move the report.
It's, excuse me, I'm just going back to the energy efficiency of council housing. In the private rented sector, it is now illegal to rent the properties in the two bottom sectors of the energy performance rating, as in F and G. Is there any similar ruling for council housing stock?
I'm not sure if there's a similar ruling. I mean, certainly the greatest propensity for fuel poverty was in the private sector, which is why the government acted to bring in those regulations that you refer to, Harry, and certainly through our investment plan, the ambition that we've had, I think, has been to ensure that we deliver energy efficiency rated C homes. But again, I'm looking to the officers to seek clarification of that. John, I think, is...
Yeah, the current East standard, the energy efficiency standard for social housing, which we're to achieve by December 2020, is basically a C rating for most houses, for gas heated houses. The NHER rating system is quite difficult to understand because there's different ratings for electric houses and gas houses, but it's generally, if you go on the basis of a C rating, some are D for electrics depending on the fuel choice.
Okay, thank you for that, John. The keen-eyed among you will recognise that the rent restructuring exercise was conducted during the previous council term, so it's fitting that my predecessor, Councillor Dugan's role in taking that forward is given due recognition. Since then, the Housing Charter continues to set the standards and outcomes that all social landlords have to achieve in terms of consulting with tenants. This is set out in paragraphs 2.2 to 2.4 of the report, which explains that clear information and options on how rent is spent and any decisions about rent levels should reflect tenants' views. And the report also reminds us that members must fully consider those views. In setting our rent, there are to be genuine opportunities for tenants to participate. Information is provided in easy-to-understand formats. Genuine rent options are presented to tenants which reflect their priorities whilst not jeopardising the delivery plan with unfeasible or unviable options such as a rent freeze or unaffordable rent rises. The council consulted with tenants, as we've heard, on the three options: 1.5%, 2.2% and 3% rises, all at or below inflation, but capable of delivering on the core priorities of the tenants and the business plan. And I think it can be taken as a measure of how valid the process was that the recommendation to this committee isn't simply the middle option with a substantial majority favouring the 1.5% rise and 90% of tenants favouring the 1.5 or 2.2 options. Over 1,000 tenants, as we've heard, responded to the consultation, 4 times as many as did last year. And to be honest, I think that's a remarkable achievement. And I know that many staff and tenants representatives have been working hard to promote the message to tenants that we want to know what they think, that their views are important to this process. And I think that those tenants and staff members have done a tremendous job and should be applauded for securing such a strong response from the tenant body. So a 1.5% rise will continue to ensure that our target to increase council house stock with 400 new builds is secure. We can continue to address tenant priorities to tackle energy efficiency, enabling people to live in warm homes which are affordable to heat. We can increase the estate-based initiative budget and respond better to tenants' and residents' local environmental concerns, empowering tenants to get involved and make a difference on the ground at community level. We can continue to tackle tenants' concerns around noise and improved soundproofing. This matters hugely to me because I can remember well the days where councillors simply threw up their hands when it came to complaints about noise, and officers shrugged their shoulders because there wasn't anything that could be done in those days. So we've moved on considerably since then. Importantly, we'll deliver an increase in the investment in the frontline staff to further strengthen tenancy support through early intervention. Income maximisation was raised by members of the committee, and sustainment activities to prevent tenancy breakdown in the face of universal credit, as well as enhancing our response to dealing with antisocial behaviour. We're asked to approve an average rent increase of £1.02 per week, giving an average rent of £68.81 per week over the 52 weeks of the year, and I commend that to you. We're also asked to approve the 5-year Housing Revenue Account Capital Investment Programme for 2019 to 2020 to 2023-24. And that amounts to £26.5 million of Scottish Housing Quality Standards works, the breakdown of which is summarised in paragraph 4.3, which contains almost £7 million of external fabric works, almost £5.5 million worth of kitchens and bathrooms, over £4 million of central heating systems that I mentioned earlier, and I did a quick flick through the pack and it comes to, I think, 2.3 million on the triple glazed windows, 1.6 million of which is in the coming capital year. It also secures the council house buybacks and major adaptations for disabled tenants, and importantly, replacement of lifts to ensure compliance with fire safety regulations in multi-stories. I'm very happy to endorse and put the recommendations set out in section 11.5 to you, and I'm happy to move them. And can I ask the Vice Convener to second that motion?
Thank you, Convener. This is a detailed report of the significant works being carried out by the Housing Service. I think we've all agreed that the tenant involvement is the central core to that work. It's a vital part for the success today and tomorrow. And happy to second, Convener.
Thank you very much for that. Is there an amendment? No. We've had fairly commenty type questions in the course of this discussion. Are there any additional comments? Can we agree the paper? Thank you very much. Paper 6 is the Rapid Rehousing Transition Plan. Our vision for rapid rehousing and tackling homelessness is focused on preventing homelessness, minimising the impacts of homelessness where it cannot be prevented. Our vision is treating people with dignity, compassion and respect through early intervention, meaningful advice, assistance and support, to deliver a rapid route for homeless people to move directly to settled accommodation, which reduces the need for temporary accommodation and minimises the length of time that people spend in temporary accommodation. It's more than just a vision in Perth and Kinross. It's our mission statement where we walk the walk, not merely talk the talk. Our success has been recognised by the Homelessness and Rough Sleeping Action Group, and as I've reported to this committee with what may seem like monotonous regularity. But we have achieved something quite exceptional through the Home First transformation, and we should be rightly proud of what we've done to deliver better outcomes for people in real crisis, to start to turn their lives around with a secure and stable home as that foundation. That commitment was signalled out for praise by Kevin Stewart, the Minister for Housing, at the LGIU Awards ceremony at the end of last year, where he went off script to give us a special mention for leading the way in Scotland in terms of rapid rehousing and reiterating the commendation our work received in Holyrood earlier that day. Having successfully introduced Homes First, our rapid rehousing programme, which has cut the length of stay in temporary accommodation, the need for large numbers of units of temporary accommodation and hostel support, our plan, in comparison to some that I've read, is focused on developing the next level of rapid rehousing solutions through personalised budgets, early intervention and homelessness prevention funding, creating tenancy-ready homes with tailored supports to sustain tenancy from day one, from settling in transition support to intensive wraparound support for tenants with complex and multiple needs. Our plan builds on the solid foundations of our joint allocations policy, our firmly established private rented sector housing and enhancing access to the private sector, an allocations policy which delivers sufficient priority and proportion of properties to homeless applicants, the council house buybacks that we've heard about before, our new build programme, as well as bringing empty properties back into use. And all of these will continue to be the keystones and building blocks that will feature in our rapid rehousing transition plan. At the heart of the plan and what will drive its success is the team, where it is the commitment, personal drive and moral compass of our staff and the people that I've met, combined with the highly visible leadership of the service, which is making the telling difference. We didn't get where we are by accident or because of the laudable aims of the Scottish Government faced with a crisis in temporary accommodation in Scotland, but through a relentless process of change going back over the past 12 years. I'm very happy to commend this paper to you. Are there any comments or questions on it? Councillor McCall.
Thank you, Convener. This is a very good report, so thank you very much indeed. And I also want to take this opportunity to commend the more person-centred approach towards rehousing homeless people and, in fact, the Ready to Occupy initiative. However, as you will know from previous meetings, again, the Ready to Let standards are sometimes not quite as good as they could be, particularly for people who are homeless or vulnerable. So I'm just wondering if part of this process there will be a review of the Ready to Let standards, so that when people, particularly those most vulnerable and homeless, are offered a property, that it is in fact ready to occupy.
Absolutely. I think what the report says is that's what we are intending to do. The appendices to the report kind of specify the sorts of tailored support that we are wanting to provide to people to ensure that the homes that they move into are ready to occupy. And I think that's slightly different from reviewing the Ready to Let standard. It is about adopting that personal and more flexible approach, rather than simply across the board bumping up the cost of the Ready to Let standard. Claire, do you want to respond further to that?
In terms of, I mean, absolutely, I think sort of to echo the comments there, in terms of our void properties, all void properties at the point that they're handed over to new tenants, incoming tenants, meet our lettable standard, which is a standard lettable standard. We've undertaken extensive benchmarking nationally in terms of the standard of accommodation, and the lettable standard has been agreed with our tenants. You'll see from the previous report, we've put in an additional budget provision in terms of voids. As you know, we've had an increase in our void turnover, so we're looking to ensure that we can cope with that additional demand and ensure that we've got the capacity in the budget to fulfil that. The Tenancy Ready Fund recognises that many of our homeless households that are coming through into mainstream housing maybe need that extra support at the time that they're moving into a tenancy. And the Tenancy Ready Fund really focuses on, it's not just ready to let, it's actually ensuring that the property is ready to occupy and taking that very person-centred approach. So that's the proposal here, is that actually whatever that individual might need, and you can see there are a range of different issues. It could be basics in terms of furnishings, it could be support in terms of moving into the property and whatnot. That is exactly what the Tenancy Ready Fund aims to achieve.
And I think importantly that fund is there to complement other sources of support and assistance. I've got Councillor Bailey, but did you want a supplementary, Councillor McGowan?
Just a supplementary, yes, and I really welcome that additional support. But as I said before, I get a lot of tenant queries around the lettable readiness of properties, and particularly from people who are homeless, perhaps don't have the capacity or the ability to do some of the things that perhaps might be considered more able for other people to do, such as painting and cleaning and other bits of basic decoration even. And so they're not included in the Ready to Occupy packs, but certainly I think in the lettable standards that needs to be looked at in conjunction with people who will be eligible for or require the additional support to look at how the lettable standards for those particular demographics of tenants are supported completely in a full wraparound, person-centred approach.
Do you want to respond to that?
Yeah, I suppose 2 points there. Across all of our void properties, we're looking at a range of improvement activities and feedback in terms of the lettable standard. In fact, we met earlier this week, and I think we've got a voids workshop planned over the next couple of weeks with some of the wider staff within the service in terms of going forward, what is our offer for void properties. We've recently met with colleagues from another local authority to compare their approach, look at their lettable standard, compare it with our own, and certainly we'll undertake extensive engagement with our tenants round and about that. So absolutely that is an area that we will continue to look at in terms of the lettable standard and what our tenants want. And again, certainly in terms of ensuring that we're supporting new tenants to move into their properties. One area that we want to look at, and that's detailed within the Rapid Rehousing Transition Plan proposals, is to undertake some detailed consultation with people who are facing homelessness or have experienced homelessness. So that is one of the key kind of first points of the project that we'll be walking into at the beginning of April once we secure the funding, or once we're clear about what funding we have secured. We intend to undertake some fairly extensive engagement about the homeless services that we deliver, and that will include details of the accommodation, its location, its size, its type, its standard, and we will use that feedback to inform any future improvements going forward.
Councillor Bailey.
Thank you, Kavina. Pardon me. I welcome the content of this report and also the very proactive plan that we have in front of us. This is all great. Specifically within domestic abuse, my question is really about the more recent broader definition of domestic abuse, which I understand now includes psychological abuse and also more recently financial abuse. What things does this council do proactively to help people who report with those forms of non-violent domestic abuse and apply for housing? Are they considered on a par with violent forms of domestic abuse, is my question.
Okay. Obviously, at the end of last year, we signed up to the Make a Stand pledge, the campaign organised by the Chartered Institute of Housing, and part of that was to enhance our services and supports to women who are victims of domestic abuse. I don't know whether that be Elaine, or do you want to?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, certainly in terms of your question, the housing service and the homeless team, any form of domestic abuse, if there is a household who is experiencing or fleeing any form of domestic abuse, they will be treated absolutely equally in a very supported, person-centred approach in terms of what their individual needs are, in terms of not just accommodation but also support. As Councillor Barrett said, we've signed up to the Domestic Abuse Pledge. The housing service is a key partner on the Violence Against Women partnership. We were recently invited along to the Chartered Institute of Housing, had held a strategic discussion event because of some of the good practice that we undertake here. So yeah, it is absolutely a key priority for us and will continue to be.
Thank you, very reassuring. Thank you.
Councillor McEwen.
Page 55, 2.5 talks about this policy being able to reach potential savings associated with the reduction of our temporary accommodation portfolio. What would be envisaged would happen to savings? Would it go straight back into this, or would it?
Well, I think that the savings would accrue to the general fund. Yeah. It would be the housing general fund, so they would be, you know, available for other priorities. They may well contribute towards savings targets as well. Councillor Hearn.
Thank you, Convener. My question is regarding Appendix 5 and Priority 7, which is the St Catherine Square redevelopment, which happens to lie in my ward. I'm just interested there that it's got, in terms of when it's going to happen, is to be confirmed. I just wonder if there's any idea when we're likely to start anything in the St Catherine Square area.
We haven't got fixed dates as yet. Certainly we've undertaken some feasibility work in terms of options and proposals and costs. We've established a project team, and so at this stage, start date, I don't know, June, if we've got, I think it would be too early for us to say at the moment in terms of start date. We need to properly scope out the project, agree what that will be, and that can be a fairly lengthy process. So as soon as we've got more information, we will get that to you.
And some of it would be determined on the success of our bid and the award of funding, you know, in response to our plan. So, are there any other questions, comments? Can we agree the paper? Thank you very much. The Vice Convener will take the remaining items on the agenda.
Thank you, Convener. We're now looking at the report from the Scottish Fire and Rescue Service. This report covers the festive period just past. Details of incidents are shown in 5.1 of the report, with last year's figures for the same period shown in brackets. As you will see, there has been a reduction in almost all areas, in some cases significant reduction. Unfortunately, however, there was one fire casualty. The report also details a number of safer communities activities carried out by the Fire and Rescue Service, notably education on home safety and basic life-saving skills, and a talk to Crieff High School on the dangers of antisocial behaviour and fires. And if we could ask Area Manager Gordon Pride to give his report, please. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Vice Convener. As we've already commented on by the Vice Convener, I'll be giving the report before asking the members to not scrutinise and comment on the report. There's just a couple of elements I'd like to address and expand on. The report itself is dated from the 1st of December to the 1st of January, covering the festive period. In addition to that, we will also be bringing to the next committee a report from the 1st of October to the 31st of December to clarify this in the full detail. The report was turned around very quickly, so some of these figures remain draft as always, but again we'll be giving further clarity to the full quarter 3 report. But looking at the figures we have, probably the key one that jumps out at me is the fatal fire casualty. We had one fatality during this period, and during the private session I'll be able to give you some more information, but there's still ongoing investigations, so I'm not in a position at this stage to give all the information, but when we are able to, we will bring it to the committee itself. Moving on to 5.2, looking at the deliberate fires, again a reasonably positive outcome. The numbers continue to remain low and comparable with the previous 5 years, or the comparison, the average of that period of time. Moving on to accidental dwelling fires, again another positive report. We had probably 3 significant fires, one in Glenfarg, one in Lochray, one in Fortingale, and I'll look to speak to the fire in Fortingale later on in the private session. Touching on the fire casualties, we've identified 2. One was required to go to hospital suffering from slight smoke inhalation, and the other received first aid on scene only. Touching on the non-domestic fires, again another positive stat for us here. There were 3 in the local prison and another significant fire in a significant fire in a greenhouse which was completely destroyed, as reported here. A number of special service incidents. It says here in the report that there were no RTC fatalities. Unfortunately, the reporting period has caught up with us, and unfortunately I'm able to respond that we have attended 1 fatal RTC on the A9 during this period, but again that was didn't come through before the deadline of the report. But again we'll be giving more detail on that as we report for the full quarter. Looking at false alarms is one of our key targets towards the end of this year and next year, to try and drive down the number of unwanted fire alarm signals. As I've reported to this committee a number of times, we are beginning to invest significant time and effort in that, and we will hope to see a drive down. The December period in general tends to be a period where we have probably a lower number of these calls, probably due to the festive period anyway. But again, we will continue to drive that down throughout the year and into the next year with significant activity. We've identified some notable activities here, looking at the number of house fires, looking at hotel fire, which again I'll speak to you slightly more about in the private period, some water rescue incidents and some road traffic collisions. And then, as the Vice Convener identified, there has also been a number of safer community activities, looking at some of the basic life support skills. We've worked in partnership. This one at the Lochleven campus, and the other one I'd probably like to comment on is the joint work undertaken at Crieff High School, trying to tackle some of the antisocial behaviour and drive those elements down. So really that's a quick whistle-stop tour through the paper, but with your permission, Vice Convener, happy to take questions.
Thank you, Gordon. Any questions? No? Are we happy to accept the report? Yes. It was easy for you. Okay, so we'll now move on to the police report. Again, this covers the festive period from the 21st of December to the 1st of January. Unfortunately, we have no statistics, which we normally have. We may possibly get some further information from the presentation. Hate crime is always distressing, and the report details one such instance, this time involving disability. Sadly, another vulnerable person became victim of a telephone scam, which resulted in a loss of more than £10,000, and therefore we should all be aware that this is an ongoing problem and can take many forms. I understand Chief Inspector Scott was a potential winner of a lottery. The fact that he's still here and this has not been done by video link must imply that it is a scam. Tragically, there was one road traffic casualty made worse than it was on a Christmas day. Could I ask Inspector Scott to go on?
Thank you, Vice Convener. I'm sure even if I had won £900 million, I think it would probably be here anyway, just to serve the good people. Broadly speaking, I would say that the festive policing plan was successful and a relatively peaceful time for ourselves and our communities. However, as the Vice Convener did mention, domestic violence is something that's always close to the surface and can rear its head, particularly when alcohol and family tensions probably increase, and that was this year was no exception. However, we did not see a significant rise in domestic violence over the period, which is probably about as good as it gets, unfortunately. We'll continue to remain our focus on day-to-day business. Hate crime was mentioned there. Hate crime within Perth Kinross is relatively low as far as reported to the police, and we would always encourage victims of hate crime or third-party reports to come to ourselves so we can investigate these types of incidents. To give some idea of scale of hate crime within P&K and how perhaps we compare against some of the other local authorities, we generally receive about 2 complaints a week of some form of hate crime. The majority of that would be racist-based. Our detection rate has and hopefully will continue to be in excess of 80%, which is a good detection rate generally for crimes reported to the police and indeed for hate crime across the country. Lucky enough to receive a report this morning. We're doing some work divisionally within D Division, looking at the effects or the comparisons of hate crime, and per 10,000 we significantly below areas of Dundee and Angus, which I would like to think is a positive, but I always have that caveat that we can only investigate that is reported to us, so we'd encourage elected members and others, if they are aware of hate crime, to please bring that to our attention. Antisocial behaviour, again over the festive period with alcohol and parties, can see an increase. We did a lot of preventative work, working with licensed premises in a very supportive manner, and I think we saw the benefits of that. We did over the festive period over 100 visits to licensed premises, and I think we saw the benefit of that, and no substantial acts of violence. I was on duty on the 1st of January covering the division, and we had spoken about the One Punch initiative, and tragically there was an incident in Dundee, a fallout at a taxi rank, what may have been a relatively minor matter, however translated to someone losing their life just with literally a one punch. So these sort of things can happen, so we can never be complacent and try and have those plans in place to make sure that we have officers, taxi marshals, wardens, etc. Supporting communities at that time of year. There was additional patrols in all areas, but we also focused somewhat in the city centre, looking to support the local economy, and there was relatively low levels of shoplifting reported. The Vice-Convener did mention one of the scams which is reported there, and we worked with trading standards to provide support to the individual and the family to prevent them becoming a repeat victim. That is one of the types of crime that can be, once a vulnerability is spotted by the perpetrators, they can come again and again, whichever method they find is successful. So rather than just dealing with the one incident and trying to walk away from it, we try to make sure that there's supporting, whether that's from social work, trading standards in this case, or others. Particularly we encourage family members to support individuals, but the disturbing circumstances there. We mentioned, colleagues mentioned that we have had one fatal RTC, unfortunately, over the period, which is under investigation, and it would appear that speed was a contributing factor in relation to that. We also had a number of events across the length and breadth of Perth and Kinross, which give communities an opportunity to celebrate the period, and these included the Comrie Flambeau and indeed the Pitlochry New Year's Day party, which passed successfully and without incident. One of the things I occasionally am asked for as well is in relation to drunk driver statistics and how it affects us locally. I don't have particularly local stats available, but nationally the campaign run pretty much all through December into the first week of January. There was over 8,500 drivers stopped, and over 500 drivers were over the limit. That kind of compares generally relatively similar to previous years. But one thing was highlighted by ACC Williams in the report. He documented, as we've transitioned from the legacy forces into one service over the last 5 years or so, unfortunately the failure rate has increased to, it's now 1 in 15, which is roughly double where we were before. So if you stopped legacy Tayside, we could have expected 1 in 30 to be a positive breath test. That is now 1 in 15, and there's various ways of interpreting that. However, what I would say is that as a service, we're much more willing to receive information from the public, from elected members and others, and to deal with that more quickly. So if we have reports coming that Ian Scott's leaving for work at 6 o'clock in the morning on a long lie, then and he's under the influence of alcohol, then we will react to that much more quickly than we would have previously. And I think that can be a benefit, but it's disappointing that motorists or some motorists continue to drink, take substances and drive. To give you some idea of the scale, generally speaking, D Division Tayside would be around a tenth of those numbers. So if you take 500, to give you some idea, we're probably looking around 50 people over the limit, and again, generally we would be about a third of that. So that maybe gives you some idea of the scale of the issue within Scotland, D Division and Perth and Kinross. Happy to take any questions.
Do we have any questions? Councillor Coates.
Just one question, Chief Inspector. Just going back to the hate crimes issue, is there any particular ethnic group that is the victim of this hate crime targeted particularly?
So interestingly enough, the report I received this morning was looking how it affects the nighttime economy, and probably around 50% of the hate crime in Perth and Kinross, and indeed within the division, links to the hate time economy, which tends to suggest that alcohol unfortunately is involved. It might be catering premises, it might be taxi drivers, and just a lot of the crime we get, it's as much stupidity as anything else. It's the inappropriate use of language. So whereas if I got into a disturbance with somebody, they might call me grey-headed, or if I'm wearing my glasses, specky. Unfortunately, they tend to go to the base levels. So if someone's colours, different to the norm in the area, they'll use that. The majority tends to be racist in nature, We obviously have a large Eastern European population, so unfortunately Poles tend to be the victims. Police officers tend to be the victims if they have if they're of colour, or again if English isn't the first language. That can be, they'll just pick on something that they feel will upset people.
Councillor Drysdale.
Thank you, Vice Convener. Before I ask my question, can I just, we've spoken about the road traffic accident on Christmas Day, and there was obviously one just last week on the A90 between Perth and Dundee, which resulted in road closures on both occasions. Can I just pay tribute to your officers and yourselves for the excellent way in which the whole operation is managed to minimise the disruption to the travelling public, so thank you for that. My question also relates to driving, in particular drink driving, and the points that you've made in your verbal report there. You've indicated that you would welcome increased advisories from members of the public in terms of people who may be drink driving. Can you, just for clarity, and given that the press are with us, can you explain how somebody should contact the police in the event of them believing somebody to be drink driving?
Yeah, thank you for your kind comments. I'll feed them back to officers, particularly in the road policing unit, where it's a difficult balance to have a road closure which can affect thousands of motorists very quickly, but also the need to maintain the safety of the locus and allow a full and thorough investigation, particularly in serious or potentially fatal accidents, for that long-term information to be shared with the families of those affected. It depends a wee bit on the circumstances in relation to a suspicion of drink driving. If it's there and clear and imminent, perhaps you've been out socialising and you see someone that's obviously, or appears obviously inebriated, and they're going to be getting into a car, that would be 999. You know, we're potentially someone's life's at danger by the acts of a drunk driver. So if it's something as imminent as that, phone 999. If you're happy that it's a more general concern, does he not always go to the golf club and have 2 or 3 pints? Then perhaps 101. A lot of people are still a little bit reticent about contacting the police, so other ways would be Crime Stoppers, which is totally anonymous, or indeed if they wish to pass it to elected members or other that could feed that into myself, and we would be happy to work with that.
Councillor Bailey.
Thank you. Particularly interested in the recent commentary around scams and other forms of crime. I find it concerning that acquisitive crime is sort of moving online and to telephone, much like so many other walks of our life. And I presume that's because we're keeping our possessions more securely, cars are now more secure, homes are more secure. And without encouraging you to gaze into a crystal ball too much, Chief Inspector, what do you think the big change that will be, that we'll look back in 10 or 20 years' time and think, like we do now, why didn't we lock our front doors? Why didn't we have double glazing? What one change do you think we need to precipitate in order to reduce online acquisitive crime?
When we look at, and you mentioned stuff that's happened previously in relation to when I was a lad out on the beat, it was the theft of cassette radios from cars, because cars didn't have alarms, so it was a smash the window, and you could come into half a dozen of them on a morning. Again, houses, CCTV, alarms, the technology's improved, and we look at how our roads are safety, vehicles have adapted. I think as we look at relatively few people have cash in the house, and we encourage people not to keep cash or other valuables in the house. Generally speaking, it's in bank accounts or tied up elsewhere. So the vulnerability has shifted, and we look at potentially at countries, organisations and individuals, and we're probably the convenience and the increases in technology that have been afforded to people have gone so far ahead of the technology to keep it secure. So I would imagine as the mobile phones are now fingerprinted, there's facial recognition, there's retina type things, I would imagine banks and others will and hopefully with the support of police services, identify technological opportunities to keep people's money safe. However, history tells us also that criminals tend to be very flexible in the approach, and it will be a continuing battle as we make one type of crime less simple. They will find something else. What probably has changed is the global nature of this criminality. While not looking to dismiss people coming around doing shoddy driveways or gutterings, which still crops up now and again, it tends to be local in nature, perhaps other parts of the country or the area. When we're dealing with sexual extortion, when we're dealing with these scams, we very quickly will be dealing with other countries, whether that's Nigeria, Russia, it can be Eastern Europe, it can be China, and that is a scale of a problem that we yet really to find the best means to deal with.
Councillor McCall.
Thank you, Vice Convener, and thank you for your report, Chief Inspector. My question is again in relating to the statistics of people who are over the limit following the drunk driving test. Excuse me. I'm just wondering if there's any particular time of day that's perhaps shows a bigger instance of positive tests. You mentioned somebody leaving, or yourself leaving in the morning, and there was a question that was asked of me over the festive period from visitors from outside of Scotland about the new limit, and my advice was just don't do it. But I was just curious if there's been any increase in terms of failed breath tests at particular times of the day that wasn't there before.
It is good advice, and I'll maybe link that into some of the technological solutions that are available. While no system bought off perhaps the internet would be 100% accuracy, it would give you relatively cheaply for around £10 you can get an analyse that will give you an indication as to where you are. So people might want to consider that, but your advice is if you've been drinking the night before and you know you've had maybe more than one or two social drinks, think long and hard. Make sure you've had a reasonable rest time. You've had a sleep, you've had breakfast, you're feeling okay. But unfortunately, everybody's body's different. So you and I could be on it, as they say, and have 3 or 4 drinks. And with me being perhaps of a larger build and more used to alcohol consumption, perhaps my body would deal with it in a different manner to your own. So it is a difficult one to deal with. The core of the question, though, is the vast majority of our positive breath tests are in the evening at the time. We do get the occasional morning after type event, but haven't seen a particular increase in the proportion of that. That may be something to do about people are more aware and phone in and contact us. Ian Scott's just left and he smell of alcohol, whereas the next morning that's less likely. But we do morning checks as well. We're doing speeding checks, and then obviously if something was noticed by officers, they will continue to do that. So yes, it does happen, but the vast majority of our positive breath tests tend to be in the evenings, nights and at weekends.
Thank you, Vice Convener. In relation to drivers under the influence of other substances, what type of tests or statistics have you around that?
Yeah, I don't have any statistics to hand. It's something I can maybe bring to the full quarter report to see if what we've had in that period. The tests are done by additionally trained officers in road policing. It's really almost a sobriety test, which can then link on to other stuff. But it's almost what you see on the TV in America. Walk in the straight line and touch, and that develops to the ability to answer questions.
Yeah. Councillor Drysdale.
Thank you for this opportunity to ask another question, Vice Convener. And speaking as somebody with an even larger build than yourself, sir. I didn't know. I just wanted to move on to a completely different area, but and I wonder if you would like to take an opportunity today, again with the press present, to to remind people of the risks associated with going out to defrost their cars in the morning and leaving the engine running while they go back into the house. And I wonder if you can also speak about any data or trends that you've seen in recent years about cars being stolen from outside front doors.
I'm slightly starting to worry that you've been stalking me this morning, because I go my morning walk before I come into work, and driving through, bearing in mind the state in Blairgowrie, what I would call the posh houses. I go for my walk, and there's two vehicles in the driveway. One a rather nice Mercedes, and another one an Audi. Both sitting, lights are on certainly, heating up for the occupiers who weren't there to be seen. I was tempted, I have to say, I was tempted, but I fought that back, and I'll maybe try and get a local officer to go around and give them some suitable advice. I know the press is here, and I'm conscious saying we don't have, or we haven't seen that sort of criminality, but the thought's always in mind that people are exposing their property at risk by, particularly when it was frosty this morning. It's nice to have a warm car to get into in the windscreens, and obviously that's the safest thing to do. But I would encourage motorists not to leave their vehicles unattended in driveways or elsewhere. I wouldn't say particularly in Blairgowrie, but in areas where that may happen. So I think there was a second point as well. Was that which? That was okay. Thanks.
Councillor Hearn.
Councillor Kinross goes back to the drug.
All right. Councillor McEwen.
I had the pleasure last night of formalising all these multiples of questions I've had for this committee so far, and my family in the background were watching one of the police traffic television programmes down south, where they actually were using an actual test kit for testing for other drugs, other substances. I think, for example, the programme, there was a guy caught with cocaine in his system using that. Is that something that Police Scotland as a whole are looking at? Or?
One of the difficulties is it depends on what substance we believe is being used. So that there's test kits for certain types of drugs and sobriety tests for others. So it's a mixed match, and hence the relatively specialist nature of those that are providing the test and have got additional training. It's maybe something I could bring back to one of the committees to get one of my road policing colleagues to give a wee update on, just to give the specifics of how that training goes, and perhaps the limitations and the increased capabilities we now have. Happy to do that.
Any further questions? No? Councillor Coates.
Just one brief question, Chief Inspector. Just going back to the breath testing, what is the proportion of people who are caught now under the current limit, who are between the current limit and the old limit?
Okay, thanks for that question, Councillor Coates, and it's one that's been asked before, particularly in the first year of the lowering of the breath test limit. I don't have specific figures. It was around 10% for the first year, and I wouldn't have thought it would have changed considerably. I think what we have is the vast majority of motorists, while saying there's a different proportion that still do drink and drive, the vast majority of motorists are very responsible. They're aware of the legislation that's been in place probably the best part of 40 years now, and comply with that. It is those people who are probably determined to continue to flout the law and drink and drive. There is a proportion that you might say it's a one-off or unfortunate, but the information that we get fed from the public is it's individuals potentially have an alcohol problem who have that lifestyle choice and then try to continue with their life. But the proportion of individuals who would have been who would have passed the old breath test limit, but not the new one. I don't have that specifically, but in the first year it was around 10%. Okay.
Any further questions? Are we happy to accept the report? Right. Before we progress any further, could I just add a personal comment, if I may? As most members will know, I and my wife run a shop in Bridge of Cowley. Last week, early in the morning, the silent alarms sounded. Unbeknownst to us, we were asleep upstairs. the monitoring station, of course, unable to get through to us, alerted the police, who were on the premises within a very short space of time, and checked the perimeter. All this unbeknownst to us at the time. Subsequently, when we finally got up in the morning to get the papers sorted out and do the work, we managed to contact the monitoring station and obviously stand down the alert. But when we left the building, one of the side gates was open. And as you can imagine, alarms going off, gates open, it does worry you, especially in a rural area. And we contacted the police and subsequently found out that because the gate is swollen because of the wet weather, the bolt that secures it doesn't go through quite easily. You have to know how to do it. It's all in the wrist action, as they say. And the wind obviously blown the gate back open since the police left. So I'd really wanted to just thank you, Inspector, for the work of the police coming up to check the perimeter first of all, and also for the officer who took the time to ring 3 times and speak to my wife to assure her that there was nothing to worry about and that it was the police, just an accident that the gate opened. So again, my thanks for the speedy response. The system obviously works, and particularly for the officer who spent that amount of time ringing to assure that there was nothing to worry about. And my special thanks for her, if you could pass them on to her, please.
Thanks very much, and I'll pass on those comments. Thank you.
Okay, members, we'll now move on to the private papers. So if we may ask members of the public to leave. Pass the next paper, I can ask Gordon Pride to come back and address us on the private paper.